Everybody taught us 1, 2, 3, and ABC. They didn't teach us the lesson of black and white. This belongs, in a way, in our culture, to the hushed-up side of things. Now, you see, the lesson of black and white is this. If you realize that all your senses are really one sense, a kind of touching. You touch light with your eyes. You touch air vibrations with your eardrums and get sound. Then the smell is touching gases and dust in the air. Taste is touching the texture of food and things. The touch with the epidermis is perhaps the crudest form of touch, and sight the most subtle. But you realize that all sensation whatsoever is a vibration. It goes on and off. It's a like this, but if it goes fast enough, you don't notice the off. You only notice the on. An arc light, for example, is going on and off with terrific speed. So much so that you shouldn't use an arc light in a sawmill, because the on and off can synchronize with the speed of the saw, and a circular saw may appear to be still when it's actually moving. But all things are like that, you see? On and off. And you can't have the vibration unless it's a wave pattern. The crest of the wave is on, the trough of the wave is off. Now, you can't have a wave, which is half a wave. In other words, no wave exists with a crest alone. There must be a trough. A half wave cannot be manifested. Now, if you don't understand that, if you don't realize that on, off constitutes a unity, and although they are different, they're inseparable, like the two poles of a magnet. If you don't realize that, you get scared that off may win. And if you get scared that off may win, you start another game, instead of the game of black and white or on and off, the game on must win. And then the game degenerates into a fight. It becomes serious. Wowee, the awful awfuls might get the better in the end. They won't. They may appear to, but they won't. Being, you see, is at work, because being is constantly being non-being, being non-being. Now you see it, now you don't.
Temperance.
But if you don't see that, you see, you get mixed up. And you don't understand the relationship of yang and yin. So it is the inner connection, or rather the inseparability of yang and yin, which is what is meant by Tao. That's why Tao cannot be explained. And the reason, again, if I may put it in another way, is that all thinking is classification. It's asking, is you is or is you ain't? Is it this or is it that? Because after all, if you want to say something is inside, it requires an outside. You can't have an inside without an outside, or an outside without an inside. Which is it? You say choose. And of course, Westerners are always choosing. Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide, in the strife twixt truth and falsehood for the good or evil side. Then it is the brave man chooses while the coward stands aside. You see, you must choose. Which are you? And we magnified this into a nightmare, where the ultimate consequence and destiny of the cosmos is, are you saved or are you damned? Forever. What a thrill that decision is. See? What people don't understand is that you don't know you belong to the saved group unless there's also a damned group. In every American town, there are the nice people who live on one side of the tracks and the not so nice people who live on the other. In my town, which is Sausalito, there are the people who live on the hill, and they are the nice people. And then there are the people who live on the waterfront, who are bohemians and beatniks and goodness only knows what. Well, now, when the nice people on top of the hill meet for their cocktail parties, the main thing that they discuss is how the whole town is deteriorating and how the awful people are proliferating and fouling the bay up and so on. And they feel that this boosts their collective ego because they know they're the nice people. Meanwhile, the bohemians and beatniks get together at their parties and they play like they're the real in-group, because all those squares and bourgeoisie who live up on the hill are engaged in a business rat race, doing work which is of no interest in order that they may buy toy rocket ships and have wall-to-wall carpets and horribly clean houses and may be snobbish. And so they, bohemians and beatniks, boost their collective ego. See, by arguing against the people on top of the hill. What neither side realizes is they need each other. Because you don't know who you are if you want to belong to an in-group, unless you define.
You know what's funny, Narges, is that girl Nora Bandura from the app, she told me like a couple days before she got arrested that you and I should talk and we should date. She's like, I've known Narges longer than you, though. She was like so insistent on that, but you know, she's projecting.
And an out-group. It is the same with philosophy. There are only two kinds of philosophy in all the history of philosophical debates. One side is called prickles, and the other is called goo. And prickles people are people who like things to be sharp and clear and definite. And they are the sort of people who become scholars and engineers and scientists, the type that always like clear statistics and discipline and everything well in order. And they look upon other people who they think are vague and sloppy and who are romantic and so on and unrealistic and wishful. And they say, you're just goo. Well, the goo people turn around and say to the prickles people, well, you're just bones. You just rattle. You've no skin on you. You know the words, yes, but you don't know the music. You have no finer feelings. And so this goes on forever. Prickles people want to believe that the ultimate constituents of the material universe are particles. Goo people prefer to think of it as waves. In classical philosophy, prickles are nominalists, goo are realists. So it goes. They're always fighting. The thing is that they don't realize that you wouldn't know the standpoint of prickles unless you knew goo as a contrast and vice versa. Because the real world is gooey prickles and prickly goo. Any way you look at it. So you see, that's just the yang and the yin. The yang is prickles and the yin is goo. And they're inseparable, but quite different. And the thing is that to see wisdom is to understand the secret conspiracy between the opposites, which you wouldn't know one without the other. That is, it were Tweedledum and Tweedledee agreed to have a battle. That, in other words, under all explicit opposition, there is implicit unity. Only, there's no real way of saying it, and in a certain way, it should remain implicit. And in a way, off stage. Don't give the show away. So you might say to me, well, why are you talking about this? You're giving the show away, aren't you? Not really. Because not everybody will believe it. Most people won't. The opposition between life and death, between good and bad, between pleasure and pain, is extraordinarily impressive. And though one may point out that it is underneath a unity, only those with a certain innate intelligence will ever be able to believe it. So one cannot really give the show away, except as Jesus said, to him that hath shall be given, and he who has ears to hear, let him hear. So this is the point of Taoism. In other words, the world people involved in practical affairs, in business and family raising, are all upset because black might win. And they really are involved, and they know they have to do something to survive. Survival is the important thing. You really must go on living. But the knowledgeable people, when you get to a mature position, and everybody as they get older and has raised a family or whatever, has to eventually get ready for death. Second half of life is a preparation for death. That to Western ears is a very gloomy enterprise. We pretend death doesn't happen. We sweep people under the carpet. When you're dying in hospital, everybody comes around and says, "Oh, you'll soon be better." And then, the poor dying patient has a kind of notices there's a hollow look in their eyes, that they're just consoling. And that's terrible. When somebody is dying in hospital, you ought to come around and say, "Listen, you're going to die. Do you realize you're going to die?" It's an occasion for an immense celebration. Because now, if you accept that you're going to die, you can let go of yourself. And you won't be a nuisance to yourself anymore. And so we should have a champagne party, or we should have sacraments according to taste. There should be some very special conscious entry into death of letting go of oneself. Because you only die once, and it should be a very important event. Instead of being something. No. The morticians come around and they pretend it hasn't happened. They have all sorts of ways of glossing it over. You know that passage in Henry Miller's essay, The Staff of Life? He's talking about that dreadful food, and he says, "Throw anything down the hatch and swallow a dozen vitamins. If that doesn't work, see a surgeon. If that doesn't work, try a Hollywood funeral. They're the duckiest, cutest funerals in the world. You can have your beloved one propped up, smoking a cigarette, reading the Bhagavad Gita or something uplifting. Cigarette guaranteed not to rot away before the lips or the buttocks. Oh, death, where is thy sting? Oh, grave, where thy victory? Jolly, what?" End of quote. This is this terrible American way of death, which does not accept it, which pretends it doesn't happen, and doesn't see that death is the most life-giving thing there is.
Except the Irish.
Except the Irish, yes, they can have a wake. But even then, I don't think that in this general tradition we really get down to seeing how revivifying death is. That, in other words, if in the course of life you die, before you die physically, now that means if you accept the fact that you are completely disintegrating, and there's nothing you can do to hold on to yourself, and nothing you can do to be safe or secure, you come alive. Now, everybody imagines they can be secure. You have investments, insurance, etc., 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 regular medical examination. But this doesn't make the slightest difference. Any minute you can slip on a banana peel, have an automobile accident, because the whole world is falling apart. When you were born, you were kicked off the edge of a precipice. And it's pure illusion to console yourself by clinging on hard to a rock that's falling down with you. There's no way of not disintegrating. The whole thing's falling apart, and people have been saying ever since 6000 BC, when we've got records going back there, that the world was going to the dogs. It is. Life is something that's always falling apart. But if you get with it, in other words, you accept the situation, you flow with it, you come alive. Because you acquire courage. You're not defending yourself all the time. You acquire energy, because you're not all locked up wondering what's going to happen next. You get the capacity to take risks, and you can't have a free people unless you're willing to take risks. It's all gambling. So to know this falling apart of everything, which incidentally is what makes it alive. Change is life. This is the Tao. And to flow with the Tao and not fight it, You see, flow with the stream. This is the next great principle of Taoism, which is called Wu Wei. So you remember your principles. The first is Tao, which can't be defined. Second is mutual arising, the inseparability of the yang and the yin. And then we get as the next third principle, Wu. This means, in Chinese, negative, not. And Wei means interfering, clutching, busyness, aggression. So the principle whereby a person may come into accord with the course of nature is by Wu Wei, not clutching. It's sometimes translated not doing, but in English that is misleading. It's sometimes the right translation. But Wu Wei means...
Okay, this is on Sri Krishna and Dionysus. De Sri Krishna et de Dionyso. Krishna hath names and forms innumerable, and I know not his true human birth, for his formula is of the major antiquity. But his word hath spread into many lands, and we know it today as INRI, INRI, with the secret IAO concealed therein. And the meaning of this word is the way of the working of nature in her changes. That is, it is the formula of magic whereby all things reproduce and recreate themselves. Yet this extension and specialization was rather the word of Dionysus, for the true word of Krishna was Aum, A-U-M, importing rather a statement of the truth of nature than a practical instruction in detailed operations of magic. But Dionysus, by the word INRI, laid the foundations of all science, as we say, science today in a particular sense, that is, of causing external nature to change in harmony with our wills. And Tahuti, de Tahuti. Tahuti or Thoth confirmed the word of Dionysus by continuing it, for he showed how by the mind it was possible to direct the operations of the will. By criticism and by recorded memory, man avoideth error in the repetition of error. But the true word of Tahuti was Amun, A-M-O-U-N, whereby he made men to understand their secret nature, that is, the unity with their true selves, or as they then phrased it, with God. And he discovered unto them the way of this attainment and its relation with the formula of INRI, INRI. Also by his mystery of number, he made plain the path for his successor to declare the nature of the whole universe in its form and in its structure, as it were an analysis thereof, doing for matter what the Buddha was decreed to do for mind. And that Egyptian magus whom the Jews call Moshe, de quodam mago Egyptorium quem appulant Jude Moshe, the follower of Tahuti was an Egyptian whose name is lost, but the Jews called him Moshe or Moses, and the fabulists made him the leader of the legendary Exodus. Yet they preserved his word, and it is IHVH, which thou must understand also as that secret word which thou hast seen and heard in thunders and lightnings in thine initiation to the degree thou wottest of. But this word is itself a plan of the fabric of the universe, and upon it hath been elaborated the holy Kabbalah, whereby we have knowledge of the natures of all things, soever upon every plane of by-coming, and of their forces and tendencies and operations, with the keys to the portals. Nor did he leave any part of his work unfinished, unless it be that accomplished 300 years ago by Sir Edward Kelly, of whom also I come, as thou knowest.
not acting against the grain of nature, acting in accordance with it. And the best possible example of Wu Wei is the art of sailing. You see, it's much more intelligent to put up a sail than to use oars, because you don't have to work so hard. So a higher form of intelligence would erect a sail. A lower form would just row. But when you sail, you cannot sail directly against the wind. If you want to sail in a direction contrary to the wind, you must tack. So in the same way, if you get caught in an overwhelming current when you're swimming, you can't turn around and swim against it. You'll drown in a hurry that way. But what you can do is you can swim with it and edge out. So this is the basic philosophy of what is called in Japanese judo. Do is the Japanese way of pronouncing Dao, the gentle way. And in judo, you overcome a violent opponent, not by direct opposition, but by using the opponent's strength to bring about his own downfall. So, you know, there's a basic kind of judo slow motion stuff that's called juno kata, which exhibits the fundamental ideas of judo. And the first lesson in juno kata is that there are two people, the attacker and the defender. And the attacker does this. And the defender, you see, he's coming straight at you with a blow. The defender, instead of pushing him away, does this. He, in other words, pulls the hand in the direction it's going and has the opponent off his balance. So that's the fundamental thing. Go with it. So a clever artist, when he's using wood, he studies the grain. And he looks at the grain in a block of wood and asks, what does it want to be? There was a competition some years ago in sculpture at the Art Institute of Chicago. And it was won by a woman. The competition consisted in each contestant being given a square foot, a cube of plaster of Paris. Do something with it. And this woman looked at it and said, it is entirely indifferent. It has no texture. It doesn't want to be anything. So she picked it up and flung it on the floor. Then it was all chipped and full of cracks, and then she looked at it again. Then she decided that it wanted to be something. She saw in those cracks and chips a form, and she brought out that form and won the competition. So great potters don't simply impose their will on the clay. They feel the texture of the clay, and they have the sense that when they throw a pot on the wheel, the pot grows of itself. And when you perfect the writing of these characters, you get the sensation that the brush is doing the work. When you skillfully make music, you feel that the music is singing through you. There was an occasion once when a great choir master in England, Sir Walford Davies, was with the former Archbishop of Canterbury, William Temple, who was a great theologian. And he was training a choir of working men, factory hands or something, in singing. And he first gave them some hymn to sing that they all knew very well, and because they wanted to impress the Archbishop, they sang it with utmost vigor, and it sounded terrible. So then he got a professional choir, which he had there, to sing the same hymn, so that they could really listen to it. Now, he said, I want you to sing it again, but look, one point I must make clear is you must not try to sing it. Don't try. All you have to do is to think of the tune and let it sing itself. And then they did very well. And he turned to the Archbishop and said, that's good theology, isn't it? I got the story from the Archbishop. So apparently he approved. So this is the principle of Wu Wei. We have all kinds of common expressions like roll with the punch, things like that. Like Shakespeare saying, there is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at its flood, leads on to fortune. We have an innate folk wisdom which realizes that this is a fundamental principle. So whereas the emphasis in the Confucian tradition in China is on interference to a large extent, keeping things in order, there's a certain anxiety about the whole thing. The emphasis of Taoism is to trust in the course of nature, about which I have to tell you two Chinese stories. One is that a farmer, both about farmers and their sons. One evening, the farmer's son came in very, very late from the fields after all the rest of the family was late for dinner. And they said to him, "What have you been doing?" Oh, he said, "I've been helping the corn to grow." Next morning, when everybody got up, they found that all the corn was dead. Because what he had done late the night before was that every new shoot of corn, he had pulled it up a little to make it higher. Another story that is told is about the farmer who lost a horse, ran away. And all his friends came round, said, "That's too bad." And he said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned, and it brought 7 wild horses with it. And they said, "My, that's great." And he said, "Maybe." The next day, his son, in attempting to train one of these horses, was thrown and broke a leg. And everybody came around and said, "Oh, that's too bad." And he said, "Maybe." The next day, the conscription officers came around and rejected his son because he had a broken leg. And everybody came to congratulate him and said, "Isn't that great?" And he said, "Maybe." So you see, the farmer was with the course of things. And he knew it goes this way and it goes that way. It goes up and it goes down. Because if it didn't go down, you would never know you were up. And if you try to be permanently up, or always right, you're trying to arrange everything in this room so that everything is up and nothing is down, or that everything's on the front and there's no back. And that is an impossible state of affairs. Well, now those, I'm going to stop here because I don't want you to take in too much at once, or to try to. Just to rehearse it, we've discussed essentially 3 principles. The one that we can't discuss at all, because that's basic, that's the Tao. The next is the principle of the mutuality, the interdependence of the opposites, that they are different but inseparable. And that goes, of course, for you as self and the world as other. You can't understand what you mean or sense or experience as self without the contrasting sense of other. That means self and other go together. They're really one, but they look different. And the third principle is the Wu Wei, the art of coming into accord with the course of nature by flowing with it and not resisting it, not trying in other.
Okay, this is De Mago Arabico Muhammad. I'm the Arabian Magus Muhammad. Behold, in these chapters have I, thy father, restricted myself, not speaking of any immediate echo of a word in the world, because these men, being long since withdrawn into their silence, it is their one word, and that alone, that resoundeth undiminished through time. Thou, Muhammad, who followeth, is darkened and confused by his nearness to our own time, so that I say not save with diffidence that his word Allah, A-L-L-H, may mean this or that, but I am bold concerning his doctrine of the unity of God, for God is man, and his doctrine of the unity of God, for God is man, and he said, therefore, man is one. And his will was to unite all men in one reasonable faith, to make possible cooperation of all races in science, yet because he arose in the time of the greatest possible corruption and darkness, when every civilization in every region had fallen into ruin by the malice of the great sorcerer of Nazareth, as some say, he is still hidden in the dust of the Simum, and we may not perceive him in his true self of glory. Nevertheless, behold, O my son, this mystery. His true word was La, Allah, L-A space A-L-L-H. That is to say, there is no God. And La'al is that mystery of mysteries which thine own eye pierced in thine initiation. And of that truth have the illusion and falsehood enslaved the souls of men, as it is written in the book of the Magus. On the great beast himself, the Logos of the Aeon, whose word is Thelema, de se ipso taumeta Firion ta something cujus verbum est ohema. Yeah, so the Logos of the Aeon. O my son, meseemeth in certain hours that I am myself fallen on a time even more fearful and fatal than did Mohammed, peace be upon him. But I read clearly the word of the Aeon, that is abrahadabra, wherein is the whole mystery of the great work, as thou knowest, and I have the book of the law that was given unto me by him thou wotest of, and it is the interpretation of the secret will of man on every plane of his by-coming, and the word of the law is Thelema. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Now because love is the law, love under will, do I write this epistle for thee, that thou mayst fulfill this inmost will of mankind, making them capable of light, life, love, and liberty by the acceptance of this law, and the hindrance thereunto is but as the shell of its egg to an eaglet, thing foreign to itself, a protection until the hour strike, and then an end thereof.
Words, to make white exclude black or black exclude white. Now, all that's very simple, but I'm sure it will create lots of questions in your minds.
You've been listening to Alan Watts in Philosophy of the Tao, Part 1, here on the Being in the Way. Alan.
If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, ride your bike.
Our loved ones, and then, of course, as you just said, allowed us to. We were talking earlier. It's really rough.
What is the secret source of things? And the latter half of life is the preeminently excellent time to find this out. It's something to do when you have finished with the family business. I'm not saying that that is a sort of unavoidable strict rule. Of course, one can study the Tao when very young, because it contains all kinds of secrets in it as to the performance of every kind of art or craft.
You can't put all your faith in it, even if I'm married, which I'm not, but...
So I've been clipping YouTube stuff, and that one went viral.
Business or any occupation whatsoever. But it does in China, in a way, it plays that role of a kind of safety valve for the more restricted way of life that Confucianism prescribes. And the there is a sort of type in China who's known as the old rogue. He's a sort of intellectual bum, often found among scholars, who is admired very much, and who a type of character which had an enormous influence on the development of the ideals of Zen Buddhist life. He is one, you see, who goes with nature rather than against nature. Well, now, first of all, I'm going to talk about ideas which come strictly out of Lao Tzu's book, the Tao Te Ching. And, of course, the basic thing in the whole philosophy is the conception of Tao. This word has many meanings. And the book of Lao Tzu starts out by saying that the Tao which can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. Or there's a pun in there, which you can't quite put into English. You can't give all the meanings, because the word Tao means both the way or course of nature, or of everything. It also means to speak. So the actual opening phrase of the book, following this word Tao, is this, you see, and this character means can be, or can, able, something like that. So the way which can be, then give it its second meaning, spoken, described, uttered. But it also means the way that can be weighed. Not W-E-I-G-H, but W-A-Y-E-D. You'd have to invent that word. The way that can be traveled, perhaps, is not the eternal way. In other words, there is no way in which the Tao, or following the Tao, there's no recipe for it. I can't give you any do-it-yourself instructions, A, B, C, D, as to how it's done. It was like when Louis Armstrong was asked, what is jazz? He said, if you have to ask, you don't know. Now that's awkward, isn't it? But we can gather what it is by absorbing certain atmospheres and attitudes connected with those who follow it. And from the art and the poetry and all the expressions and the anecdotes and stories that illustrate the philosophy of the way. So this word then, the way or the course of things, is not, you must understand this, some Christian missionaries translated Tao as the Logos, taking as their point of departure the opening passage of St. John's Gospel, in the beginning was the Word. Now, if you look up a Chinese translation of the Bible, it says in the beginning was the Tao. And the Tao was with God, and the Tao was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by it, and without it was not anything made that was made. So they've substituted Tao there. Now that...
Okay, this is called a command to his son, mandatum ad filium sum. Here I reach forth mine hands against thee in the sign of the Emperor, O son of my bowels, for with all my magical might I did let thou fight manfully and labor with diligence, with sword and trowel, say I, in this work. For this is the first and last of all, that thou bid every man do what he will, in accord with his own true nature. Therefore also blast thou that lies that man is of a fallen and evil nature, for the word of sin is restriction. the doubt of his own Godhead, the suppression of it, which is the blasphemy against his own Holy Spirit, saith not the book of the law that it is a lie, this folly against self? Therefore to every man in every circumstance say thou do what thou wilt, and teach him, if he yet waver, how to discover his true nature, earnestly and with ardor, even as I have striven to teach thee, yea, and more also. Wherefore he begat his son, so that there be freedom. Quare filium creavit ut fiat libertas. Do what thou wilt. Be this our slogan of battle in every act, for every act is conflict. Their victory leapeth shining before us, for who may thwart true will, which is the order of nature herself? Thou hast no right but to do thy will. Do that, and no other shall say nay, for if that will be true, its fulfillment is of a surety, as daylight following sunrise. It is as certain as the operation of any other law of nature. It is destiny. Then if that will be obscured, if thou turn from it to wills diseased or perverse, how canst thou hope? Fool, even thy turns and twists are in the path to thine appointed end. But thou art not sprung of a slave's loins. Thou standest firm and straight. Thou dost thy will, and thou art chosen. Nay, for this work wast thou begotten in a magic bed, that thou shouldst make men free. On his frailty, de sua debilitate. Listen attentively, my son, while I with heavy heart make confession to thee of mine own frailty. Thou knowest that I made renunciation of my wage, taking this body immediately after my death, the death of Eliphas Levi Zached, as men say, that I might attain to this great work. It is now 20 years, as men count years, that I came to my first understanding of my true nature, and aspired to that work. Now then, at the first I made no error. I abandoned my chosen career. I poured out my whole fortune without one thought. I gave my life up utterly to the work without keeping back the least imaginable thing. So then I made swift strides along the path, but in the dhyanas that were granted unto me in Kandy, in the island of Lanka, I used up my whole charge of magical energy, and for 2 years I fell away from the work. On the hand that upholds the mages, de manuque magum sustenent. Now it may be well that such periods of recuperation are necessary to such weak souls as mine, and so no ill. But I fell from my will, and sought other ends and life, and so the hand came upon me, and tore away that which I desired, as thou knowest. Also it is written in the temple of Solomon the king. Yet consider also these 2 years as a necessary preparation for the greatest of all events which befell me in El Kahira, in the land of Cam, the choice of me as the word of the Eon. Now then, for a while I worked with my will, though not wholly, and again the hand reached forth and smote me. This, albeit my slackness was but as a boy playing truant, not a revolt against myself. Wherefore, despite all, I made much progress in short time. On his sin, de suo peccato. Now then, well schooled, I strove no more against my nature, and worked with all my will. Thou knowest well how greatly I was rewarded. Yet in this last initiation to the grade of Magus, wherein 73 days, as men count days, is but one day, the ordeal grew so fierce and intolerable that I gave back a step. I did not utterly renounce the work, but I swore not to continue unless mine agony were abated. But after 15 days I came to myself in a certain ordeal wherein I knew myself finally, that I could not do other than take up that fearful burden that had broken my spirit, and for those 15 days have I not suffered infinite things? Was not the tree of my work frozen, one branch withered, and one blasted? Look no more, O my son, upon thy father's shame, on his victory through the name Babylon, de sua victoria per nomen Babylon. And after is dawn, for I have toiled through the night in my great love and care of thee. How is it with me? It is well, for I have found myself, I have found my will. The obstacles that daunted me are seen to be but shadows of shadows. Grace be unto Our Lady Babylon. Thus it is written in the book of the law, remember all ye that existence is pure joy, that all the sorrows are but as shadows, they pass and are done, but there is that which remains. Learn then that it is in the contemplation of division that sorrow is, for division is the formula of Choronzon. It is therefore discreet for thee to unite each element of sorrow with its opposite, in whose triumph of Hymen is ecstasy, until by the apprehension of the new great opposite the idea is again seen as sorrow. This then is the issue from sorrow, and thou mayst understand that I now also am confident in the necessity of this my fall to prepare the formula of mine exaltation. Therefore, my son, thus hail me, blessing and worship to the beast, the prophet of the lovely star. On the unutterable secret. De arcano nefando. My son, learn this concerning magic, that the yang moveth, and thus giveth itself up eternally. But the yin moveth not, seeking ever to enclose or restrict, reproducing in its own likeness what impression soever is made thereon, yet without surrender. Now the Tao absorbeth all without reproduction. So then let the yang turn thereto, and not unto the yin. And that thou mayst understand this, I say, it is a mystery of OTO. For the sun ariseth not, and entereth to strike upon the high altar of the minister by the great western gates, but by the rose oriel doth he make way and progress to his pageant. O my son, the doors of silver are wide open, and they tempt thee with their beauty, but the narrow portal of pure gold shalt thou come more nobly to the sanctuary. Behold, thou knowest not how perfect is this magic. It is the dearest bought and holiest of our arcana. What then is like unto my love toward thee, that bestoweth upon thee this treasure of my wisdom? My son, neglect it not, for it is the exorcism of exorcisms and the enchantment of enchantments.
Make a very funny effect on a Chinese philosopher, because the idea of things being made by the Tao is absurd. The Tao is not a manufacturer, and it's not a governor. It doesn't rule, as it were, in the position of a king. Although the book, the Tao Te Ching, is written for many purposes, but one of its important purposes is as a manual of guidance for a ruler. And what it tells him is essentially, rule by not ruling. Don't lord it over the people. And so he says the great Tao flows everywhere, both to the left and to the right. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them. And when good things are accomplished, it lays no claim to them. In other words, the Tao doesn't stand up and say, I have made all of you, I have filled this earth with its beauty and glory, fall down before me and worship. The Tao having done anything, always escapes and is not around to receive any thanks or acknowledgement, because it loves obscurity. And Lao Tzu said the Tao is like water. It always seeks the low level which human beings abhor. So it's a very mysterious idea. Tao, then, is not really equivalent with any Western or Hindu idea of God, because God is always associated with being the Lord. Even in India, the Brahman is often called the Supreme Lord, although that would the term more strictly applicable to Ishvara, the manifestation of Brahman in the form of a personal God. But Bhagavan, the Lord, Krishna, his song is the Bhagavad Gita, the song of the Lord. There's always the idea of the king and the ruler attached, but not in the Chinese Tao philosophy. The Tao is not something different from nature, from ourselves, from our surrounding trees and waters and air. The Tao is the way all that behaves. And so the basic Chinese idea of the universe is really that it's an organism. And as we shall see when we get on to Zhuangzi, who is the sort of elaborator of Lao Tzu, he sees everything operating together so that nowhere can you find the controlling center. There isn't any. The world is a system of interrelated components, none of which can survive without each other. Just as in the case of bees and flowers, you will never find bees around in a place where there aren't flowers, and you will never find flowers around in a place where there aren't bees or insects that do the equivalent job. And what that tells us secretly is that although bees and flowers look different from each other, they're inseparable. They, to use a very important Taoist expression, they arise mutually. This is one of the great phrases from the second chapter of Lao Tzu's book, where he says, this character means to have or to be. And this next one is a very important character in Taoist philosophy. It means no, negative, wu in Chinese, not to be. And then this curious expression, for which we don't have a really good corresponding idea in traditional Western thought. So, to be and not to be mutually arise. This character is based on the picture of a plant, something that grows out of the ground.
Okay, I'm gonna read a few more of these. This is on the secret through which our spirit is received in the body, de arcana per quod spiritus quidem in corpore recipiator. Here now is another formula of power, good to invoke any being to manifest in thyself. First invoke him by the power of all thy spells and conjurations with mind, concentrated in will vehement toward him, as I have written in many books. But because thou art Nemo, thou mayst safely invoke him, no matter of what nature, within thy circle. Now then, do thou confer on him as the guerdon of his obedience the dignity of a soul seeking incarnation, and so proceed to consecrate thine acts by performing the Mass of the Holy Ghost. Then shall that spirit make himself body from those elements, and thou, partaking thereof, makest thine own body his machinery of manifestation, And thus mayst thou work with any spirit soever, yet this shall serve thee most in common life. Also the qualities are well defined in the cards of the tarot, so that thou hast a clear-cut means of developing thy powers according to the need of the time. But learn also this, to work constantly under the guidance of thine holy guardian angel, so that thy workings be always in harmony and in accord with thy true will. On the Kabbalistic key of this De Clavi Kabbalistica Hui Arte. Now then, to thee who art long since master of high magic, it will be easy to show how the Mass of the Holy Ghost, sung even in ignorance, may work many a wonder by virtue of the force generated, being compelled to manifest on other than its own plane. Here then is the theory of the mystery of the Aeon, that I, being the Logos appointed thereunto, did create an image of my little universe in the mind of the woman of scarlet. It is I manifested mine whole magical self in her mind. Thus then in her, as in a mirror, have I been able to interpret myself to myself. Thou also in thine own way hast the power to create such an image, but be thou sure and alert, testing constantly the persons in that image by the holy Kabbalah, and by the true signs of brotherhood. For each person therein shall be a part of thyself, made individual and perfect, able to instruct thee in thy path. Yet often there shall be others that are to aid thee in thy working, or to oppose it. And in this matter thou shalt read especially the record of thy father, his working with Sororahitha, blessed be her name unto the ages, and certain others to boot, on the Mass of the Holy Ghost. De Missa Spiritus Sancti. Now at last, O my son, may I bring thee to understand the truth of this formula that is hidden in the Mass of the Holy Ghost. For Horus, that is Lord of the Aeon, is the child crowned and conquering. The formula of Osiris was, as thou knowest, a word of death, that is, the force lay long in darkness, and by putrefaction came to resurrection. But we take living things and pour in life and spirit of the nature of our own will, so that instantly and without corruption the child, as it were, the word of that will is generated, and again immediately taketh up his habitation among us, to manifest in force and fire. This Mass of the Holy Ghost is then the true formula of the magic of the Aeon, even the Aeon of Horus. Blessed be he in his name, Ra-Hor-Kuit. And thou shalt bless also the name of our father Merlin, Frater Superior of the OTO, for that by 7 years of apprenticeship in his school did I discover this most excellent way of magic. Be thou diligent, O my son, for in this wondrous art is no more toil, sorrow, and disappointment, as it was in the dead aeon of the slain gods. On the complete formula de formula tota. Here then is thy schedule for all operations of magic. First thou shalt discover thy true will, as I have already taught thee, and that bud thereof, which is the purpose of this operation. Next, formulate this bud will as a person, seeking or constructing it, and naming it according to thine holy Kabbalah and its infallible rule of truth. Third, purify and consecrate this person, consecrating upon him and against all else. This preparation shall continue in all thy daily life. Mark well. Be ready a new child immediately after every birth. Fourth, make an especial and direct invocation at thy Mass, being the introit, formulating a visible image of this child, and offering the rite of incarnation. Fifth, perform the Mass, not omitting the ecclesies, and let there be a golden wedding ring at the marriage of thy lion with thine eagle. Sixth, at the consumption of the Eucharist, accept the child, losing thy consciousness in him, until he be well assimilated within thee. Now then do this continuously, for by repetition cometh forth both strength and skill, and the effect is cumulative, if thou allow no time for it to dissipate itself. Kabbalistic considerations on this formula, de hac formulae considerationes Kabbalistica. Behold, moreover, my son, the economy of this way, how it is according to the Tao, fulfilling itself wholly within thine own sphere, and it is utterly in tune with thine own will on every plane, so that every part of thy nature rejoiceth with every other part, communicating praise. Now then learn also how this formula is that of the word abrahadabra. First head is the triangle erect upon twin squares. Of had it need I not to write, for he hath hidden himself in the book of the law. The substance is the Father, the instrument is the Son, and the metaphysical ecstasy is the Holy Ghost, whose name is Hriu, Hriliu. These are then the Sun, Mercury, and Venus, whose sacred letters are R, B, and D, but the last of the diverse letters is H, which in the tarot is the star, whose eidolon is D. And herein is that arcanum concerning the Tao of which I have already written. Of this I will not write more plainly, but mark this, that our Trinity is our path inwards in the solar system, and that H being of Our Lady Nuit Stare, is an anchor to this magic, which else were apt to deny our wholeness of relation to the outer as to the inner. My son, ponder these words and profit by them, for I have wrought cunningly to conceal or to reveal according to thine intelligence, O my son.
So you could say positive and negative, to be and not to be, yes and no. Light and dark arise mutually, come into being. There's none is cause and effect. It's not that relationship at all. It's like the egg and the hen. So as the bees and the flowers coexist in the same way as high and low, back and front, long and short, loud and soft. All those experiences are experienceable only in terms of their polar experience. So the Chinese idea of nature is that all the various